It is going to create quality content for my audience. It allows me to go deeper on the topics, especially of those beginning episodes, because those beginning ones are very much overview podcasts and general ideas, general concepts. And then as we get to know each other, as we get further into the podcast, then those ideas become deeper and we're able to expound on them more and create more content around them. Welcome to another episode of Listeners to Leads, where I'm helping podcasters launch and maintain a lead generating show. I'm your host, Alicia Galati, the CEO and head podcast strategist behind Galati Media, a full-service podcast management company. On this show, you'll hear my guests and I discuss everything it takes to launch a successful podcast and keep it running. If you're ready to get leads, land speaking gigs, and create deeper connections with your audience through your podcast, then this is the show for you. Today, we're going to talk about going deep instead of wide with your podcast content. This is something that I've been feeling really deeply lately, and is something that I'm starting to see my clients do with their own podcast content. And I think that it's a really good strategy for those who would like to continue having a podcast. They want to be able to still create really good content for their audience, but maybe they're having a hard time coming up with ideas or thoughts of like, I've already talked about this and I'm not really sure where to go from here because I've said all that there is to say. Now, we've had episodes before where we have talked with people who have had limited series. We have an episode going live next month, which is talking about how an online summit can be turned into an exclusive podcast. And so there's definitely options and ideas and things that you can do if you are at the point where you think, I'm kind of done podcasting. I've said all that there is to say on this topic. But if you're someone like me who enjoys podcasting and wants to keep doing it, but is kind of having a hard time at this point, I mean, we are over 50 episodes in, and I feel like I have said generally everything that there is to say about podcasting. And I do find myself repeating myself quite often and referencing back to past episodes and talking about those things. So this is something that I'm kind of working through right now myself, but I wanted to at least share it with you guys. So that way, if you're in that same boat and you're feeling that way, then you can have some ideas and strategies behind you in order to go deeper with your content rather than expanding it. So we have in episode 7 where we talked about 5 strategies to never run out of podcast content. Now, that one is great if you are starting out or if you are trying to just brainstorm some ideas and some things that you can talk about on your podcast. One of those things that we talk about in there are those content buckets. So really being very strategic with what it is that you want to talk about on your podcast and making sure that it fits within those buckets. Again, our podcast content buckets are marketing, monetization, content, launching, all specifically surrounding podcasting, and then some mindset stuff because that's really important within the podcasting realm and like getting out of your head and doing the thing that you want to do with your podcast. So those are the content buckets. Now, there's a lot that I can say about each of those things and little nuances and details, but most of the time, that means that these episodes would be 5 minutes long or maybe 7 minutes long. They'd be pretty short. I don't know that I really want to do quick bite-size episodes right now. Now, that may change in the future where I kind of go through quick, easy tip of the day type of thing. But right now, I would like my episodes to be anywhere from 15, 20 minutes for my solos, and then around 30 minutes for my guest episodes. That is how I have structured this podcast right now. So in order to do that, I need to be able to talk about a topic for 15 to 25-ish, if I'm really getting into it, minutes. Now that means that I can't have those bite-sized things right now. So what I'm planning on doing instead is going back through my content and going deeper. And so instead of going broader with my topics and maybe covering more about business or more about running an agency or more about other things that I know about, I'm going to go deeper with my content. And we talked about this a little bit when we had Sam and Karen of Making Website Magic on the podcast. They have a very niched podcast. So they are specifically talking to WordPress web designers who are women and want to run a web design business. So their content is all focused on that specific person, that person that they're thinking of, that person that's struggling with what it is that is going to get them from point A to point B in their business. They never run out of content because they are constantly talking to their audience, getting ideas, getting interactions, listening to the questions that their audience is asking for. But if you are someone who maybe doesn't have an active audience, doesn't have an active community, and has a hard time trying to get your audience to talk back to you, which I totally understand, like we've all been there, right? Then I think it's important to still find ways to interact with them and get their feedback. But if you can't, then there's always great ways to find more content or ideas. But I want to specifically note that the going deeper part is going to help you so much more than going wider. So we also have another client who's doing this where he is at almost 140 episodes, and he is having guests that were on at the beginning of the podcast back on. So he's been podcasting for, I want to say it's 3 or 4 years now. And he's having people who he had on at the beginning come back and share the journey and the current struggles or current great things that are happening in their agencies, that they're seeing, new trends that they're seeing. And that has allowed him to be able to meet his audience where they are right now. So I think that that's a great strategy as well. He tends to have a more guest-focused podcast. So that works for him in going deeper rather than wider with his content. For myself, what I plan on doing, because I do enjoy doing solo episodes, I think that they're so important in allowing me to connect with you on a deeper level and be able to support you and show that I know what I'm talking about, that I am an expert in my field, and allows me to be a thought leader within the industry of podcasting. So what I plan on doing with my content, and hopefully this will help you with ideas of what you can do with your content, is I plan on going deeper with past episodes. So if I'm looking back at my content and I have my first episode on the podcast, which was 10 ways to strategically grow your podcast audience. Now that is a really popular episode. Yes, it is the first one, so of course it's popular. But generally speaking, that episode and that blog post that's associated with it gets a ton of traffic on my website. So obviously it is a topic that people want to know more about. So how can I take that one episode and maybe break it down into 3 new episodes? One of the 10 ways is to make your show more accessible. Maybe I need to have a podcast episode that is talking about all of the different ways to make your show more accessible for your listeners, which is a great topic. It's important. And I think that it would be one that would really interest my audience. So perfect. There's a podcast idea. One of those topics was utilizing SEO, which I recently did an episode on, all about the tech tips and background behind SEO, how to do it, how to be strategic with it. And so, boom, done. Another one is using social media to promote and market your podcast. And the next one after that is using social media to interact with your audience. So I could either combine those so that way it is a longer episode and it kind of fits within my criteria of what I want my podcast to be right now. Or I could break it down even further and only have an episode that talks about each of the social media platforms and how to promote very easily and quickly and repurpose your content on each of those platforms. And then I could take that using social media to interact with your potential listeners, take that one deeper and talk about each of the platforms and the best ways to interact with your audience on each of those platforms. So it's kind of like a pick your own adventure. Which way will work best for you, and how can you connect with your audience on each of those platforms, depending on which one you use. Another episode that I could do based on these 10 ways to grow your podcast audience is I have one of those ways being to join an active podcast community. Now, maybe I can spin this one because I don't just want to list out all of the different podcast communities. That feels like maybe it should have just been a blog post. It kind of sounds boring to listen to. So I'm not going to do that. But maybe I can talk about how to use your podcast to create community. What is community? How can you facilitate it in a way that is actually going to grow community rather than just a client base for you? And what's the difference? Which one is important to you right now? So I think I could spin that in a really strategic way to ensure that it is relevant to my audience and it is something that they would enjoy listening to. And I can give my own hot takes and experiences and opinions on that topic. So by taking that one popular episode, I didn't count them as I was going through them. You guys literally just heard me live riff the ideas that I had. So maybe there were like 4 or 5 there, right? I was able to take one podcast episode and turn that into 4 or 5 podcast episodes that I can then create and record and be able to distribute to you guys. It is going to create quality content for my audience. It allows me to go deeper on the topics, especially of those beginning episodes, because those beginning ones are very much overview podcasts and general ideas, general concepts. And then as we get to know each other, as we get further into the podcast, then those ideas become deeper and we're able to expound on them more and create more content around them in ways that allows me to say, like, look, if you're a beginner, start with these beginning episodes. If you're more advanced and you're looking for more strategic, to the point ways for specific topics, then you can go to these episodes. It allows me to be able to create a resource bank for my audience so that they can go to my website and say, I am looking specifically for podcast content. All right, here are the 15 episodes on podcast content. Here are 15 episodes on podcast marketing. There's not one or more that has more content or less content. They all have deep, insightful, as well as overview things based on what the person is struggling with. So I absolutely love this idea for people who are maybe at the point where they feel like I have said all that I can say on this topic. I feel like I've said all there is to say on podcasting because I have been talking about podcasting for years now. But there's always a way for you to go deeper. There's always going to be things that you can talk about, especially when they're relevant to what is happening right now in your industry. So I think that also is a really good way to be able to give your audience recent, insightful, and relevant things that they can then use within their business or whatever it is that you're talking about for them. So then they say, oh, wow, this person's so insightful. They know so much about this topic. I think that it would be great to work with them. Boom. Great. New client, new potential client, new collaboration, whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're able to not feel overwhelmed with your podcast. You're able to not feel like you are struggling and striving and pushing to create content. Instead, the content is flowing. You can go deeper with your audience. You can create a deeper connection with them by allowing yourself to be seen as an expert in your field. So I hope that this was helpful. This was different than my typical episodes. Usually I have bullet points listed out. I have everything kind of going, but this is something I've been feeling lately. And I felt, hey, if I'm feeling it, then someone else is probably feeling it too. So I hope that this allowed you to have permission to go deeper with your audience, go deeper with your content. You don't have to branch out. You don't have to add more content buckets. Take past episodes, even if you've talked about them before in general concepts, take it a step deeper, take it a step further with your audience, and allow your awesomeness to shine. Allow your expertise on the subject to shine through for your audience. All right. If you're going to do this, if you're going to take your content deeper, send me a DM on Instagram at alicia.galati. I absolutely love connecting with you guys, and I will talk to you next time. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Listeners to Leads. If you found something in this episode valuable, I would really appreciate it if you shared it with a friend who you know would also get value from it. Want to send me a message? My favorite place to hang out is Instagram. You can find me at alicia.galati. Let me know what your favorite takeaway was from the episode. And don't forget, turning those listeners into leads is actually easy.